Just next door to Georgia's capital city and the world's busiest airport lies the city of East Point. From a humble beginning just before the Civil War, East Point by the early 20th century had become a significant transportation and manufacturing center. But as growth in the Atlanta region began to really take off in the early 1970s, East Point began to fall behind. Soon, East Point had a higher than normal jobless rate. The population stopped growing. The city retained its tradition of strong neighborhoods and a sense of community. But its commercial sector began to stagnate, and people in search of commercial amenities began to look elsewhere. By the end of the 20th century, the city's leaders had begun searching for tools to overcome this growing stagnation. One of the tools which they considered was the powers which were available to cities and counties under the Redevelopment Powers Law. The use of these powers was still experimental. Atlanta had first used these powers in 1992 to create a tax allocation district, or TAD, near the Olympic Village. But the major development that they expected didn't come right away. And when the state built Centennial Olympic Park and took a big piece of the downtown off the tax rolls, it began to look like Atlanta's first TAD would go nowhere. The city of Macon didn't have much more success. Macon tried to create a TAD in 2000, but questions immediately arose about whether the procedural requirements had been met, and the city quickly abandoned the project. These setbacks in Atlanta and Macon did not discourage the leaders in East Point. They persuaded their legislators to introduce a local bill, which was the first step in securing redevelopment powers. Then they went to the people, who ratified that local bill in a referendum. Having thus obtained redevelopment powers, the city quickly identified a site for its first TAD. They identified a location at the western end of the city, at the intersection of Camp Creek Parkway and Interstate 285. This was an area within the city limits, but most of it had never been developed, largely because its topography was difficult and it had no infrastructure. In spite of these obstacles, the city was able to bring two major developers to the city by creating a tax allocation district. As a result of the TAD, the increased property tax revenues which the development itself created went to pay debt service on $22 million worth of bonds, which were issued to pay the cost of leveling the site, putting in roads and other infrastructure, and bridging the creek which ran through the property. As a result, in 2002, Duke Realty began the development of Camp Creek Trade Center, a 4 million square foot mixed-use, master-planned business park representing approximately $100 million in new construction, 10,000 new jobs, and over $1 million in additional property tax revenue each year. North American Properties in 2002 began to develop the Camp Creek Marketplace, representing 650,000 square feet of retail space, $81 million in new construction, 1,200 new jobs, and $125 million in annual retail sales, and over $1 million in additional ad valorem tax revenue each year. The result is the first major development in East Point in over half a century, the introduction of new commercial services in an area which had long been underserved, and a tremendous halo effect, stimulating a rash of new development in the surrounding area. Property values in the Camp Creek TAD have increased tenfold over a period of 5 years. Since creating the Camp Creek TAD, East Point has continued its efforts to stimulate economic development through the use of tax allocation districts. In 2004, the city created another project-specific TAD in a persistent brownfield area. But the city later terminated this TAD as the result of developer non-performance. In 2006, the city created its third TAD running along the commercial corridors through the heart of the city. Designed to address the underdevelopment in the city's older commercial districts, this is the city's first departure from project-specific TADs, and it represents East Point's continued leadership among Georgia cities in seeking to stimulate economic development through the use of tax allocation districts.